Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of my guide where I talk about what I consider the mid-game. If you're brand new or this is your first video, I suggest you watch part 1 first where I talk about the start of the game and its various game modes. The big question I'm answering today is, what do you do after leveling your 5 stars to level 90 and reinforcing their stats to level 200? What else can you do besides doing the obvious thing of upgrading their equipment? I'll explain my approach to the mid-game and then follow up with what steps you should be taking to prepare for the endgame.
We're in the endgame now.
And then I'll end the video with another FAQ portion of 50 questions, some being tailored to new players and some being tailored to intermediate players, so let's not waste another second. So you've leveled your characters to the max and raised their reinforcement stats all the way to 200. You're probably stuck somewhere around stage 500 to 800 is my guess. How else can you make your team stronger? You've done everything you could, right? Wrong. Here are several points I want to touch on, and these steps will need to be completed in order to progress into the late game. First things first, make sure all your 5-star equipment, which includes weapon and armor, are all of epic refinement. This gives a huge boost in stats compared to the unique and legendary options. You should be spending a portion of your saved rubies on red premium scrolls. If you can't afford to refine all your equipment, then I would refine at the very least your weapon along with your helmet, chest armor, shoes, and ring. The gloves can be saved for later. If you want to know what stats to roll for, then refer to part 1 of my guide. Next, you should be looking to upgrade all your gear towards level 30 for everyone, and then level 50 for Cain and Yui, who are the backbone of every team. If this sounds too expensive to you, well, it's going to be, which means you'll have to do lots of farming in order to afford the upgrades. Nothing comes free. I will add a note here in saying the gloves and shoes are perfectly fine not being upgraded, since you don't need any evasion nor accuracy until the very late game. Delaying these upgrades will save you some gold. Now your gear should have decent refinement and reinforcement. How else can I strengthen them? You can further transcend your gear up to 10 times for every item. You attain duplicates of your 5-star gear through farming adventure and equipment chest, and with each transcendence, the item stats improve a little. The difference between an item of 0 transcendence and 10 transcendence is fairly decent, so I would continue to farm until you transcended most of your gear a decent amount. Rings and weapons will obviously take a lot longer. So you're relatively content with your refinement and reinforcement of your equipment. What do you do now? My next recommendation is to transcend your Cain and Yui. This means getting duplicates of them in order to increase their stats even further. The max amount of transcendences per character is 10. Getting Cain shards is quite easy because you can use your raid symbols you attain from your daily raid in order to exchange them for Cain shards from the raid store. Yui, on the other hand, will need to be obtained either from summoning or from getting lucky with a 5-star summoning ticket. As soon as you start the game, you should be buying Cain shards from the raid store every day. After several weeks, your Cain should be Transcendence level 10. For Yui, I would recommend free-to-play players saving up your rubies and getting her to Transcendence level 4, which means summoning 4 duplicates. That should be enough. If money's not an issue, then get her to Transcendence level 10, or T10 for short. Now you're probably thinking, what's the point of transcending them besides giving them a small boost in stats? Well, transcendence goes hand in hand with what the game calls rebirth. If you haven't seen part 1, then here's a recap. Transcendence increases your character's max level in addition to a small increase in base stats. Rebirthing, on the other hand, resets a character's level to 1, but increases their max reinforcement stats, kind of like their potential. If I try to rebirth a character who is T0, then their reinforcement stats only go up by 1 plus 0, or just 1, so from 200 to 201 in this example. That sounds pretty lame to me. Now try rebirthing someone who's T5 like my Vivian here. Her max reinforcement stat will go up by 1 plus 5, or 6. In this example, it goes up from 470 to 476, a much bigger jump than the single digit you gain from rebirthing someone at T0. The maximum stats for each character is 500. Starting at 200, 300 rebirths will take your stats to 500, and that's considered maxed rebirth. Long story short, the higher transcendence someone is, the more cost efficient it is to rebirth them, since it costs both gold and experience pots. Feel free to look at the cost benefits analysis in this chart here. Keep in mind the gold here indicates the cost of doing the rebirth, and upgrading your reinforcement stats will cost you a couple billion gold in addition to the consumption of approximately 720 to 760,000 red experience pots to fully rebirth someone, depending on what transcendence level they're at between T4 and T10, so I suggest you start farming adventure. To compare this to something else, imagine rebirthing as working out at the gym. You're at the gym lifting weights, breaking down your muscles, similarly to resetting your character's level to 1. However, once you've fully recovered from your workout, your muscles should grow back even stronger, just like how your reinforcement stats reach a new height with each rebirth. Now imagine Transcendence as the fuel you take for your workout before and after. If you don't transcend enough similarly to not consuming enough food, your gains won't be as big. Sure, you can decide not to eat anything and still make small gains, but it'll be much more efficient to eat the right amounts of food to maximize your growth. Therefore, you should transcend your characters to at least T4 before rebirthing them. I hope that makes sense. Now, who do you really need to transcend and who doesn't need it? For the purpose of this video, the two essential characters you're going to need to transcend and max rebirth are Cain and Yui. That should be enough to cover the mid-game. For who to transcend and rebirth after them, I'll talk about that in part 3 of my guide where I talk about the late game. This is because the answer to that is subjective and depends on what content you value more. So let's say you've accomplished all these steps, perhaps gone past your walls in an adventure, and stunlocked your way all the way to the 800s and possibly even 900s in adventure mode. What should you be focusing on as you transition your way into the late game? First things first is your gear. The refinement stats are probably good, but they're likely nowhere near what you want for the end game. You should be farming for blue scrolls and continuing to reroll your refinement stats until you get all 3 lines to be favorable numbers. This is also your chance to create a stunlock team if you haven't done so already, or perhaps build some gear that's useful for slasher mode and abyss mode. You can check out my individual videos for them on my channel. While most of your equips are between level 40 to 50, you should be looking to upgrade Cain and Yui's weapons to level 60 since they are the key players. This will require tons of resources, so from this point on, I recommend you continue to farm in order to accumulate a mass amount of gold, reinforcement scrolls, refinement scrolls, and experience potions. You're going to need them for the late game. It will never be enough. Stay tuned my friends for part 3 and happy farming. May the odds in rerolling be ever in your favor. Finally, we get to the good stuff. For this video, I've prepared another whopping 50 questions, so let's jump straight into it. Question 1. I'm new and free to play. Which is more important, spending rubies on red scrolls or summons? If you have the essential characters such as Yui and Kana, then focus on getting red refinement scrolls to upgrade your 5-star gear to epic. Otherwise, get Yui and Kana first and then worry about red scrolls afterwards. 2. What is penetration? Best summarized by top player Fur, penetration cuts through up to half of the damage reduction gained through defense. Here's the formula if you want to get real technical with it. In layman's terms, having more penetration allows you to further penetrate the enemy's defenses, and not all enemies' defenses are the same. Some bosses have little to no defense, so you wouldn't need any extra penetration in those cases. However, if a boss has a penetration resistance status, then you'll need to combat that with increasing your penetration more than normal. 3. What is damage reduction? Most players who have played for a long time believe most bosses to have some amount of damage reduction. This arbitrary stat for the boss reduces the damage that it takes. Think of it as another form of defense. Whatever damage you deal to the boss will be reduced according to the boss's damage reduction rate, and one way to reduce this damage reduction rate is with increasing penetration, thus increasing the damage we do to them. 4. What bonuses do you get from leveling your weapon and gear to level 50? If you level up a weapon to level 50, then whoever is equipping it gains a 10% attack boost. This is not written anywhere, however the change can be seen in your stats. As for your chest armor, helmet, shoes, rings, and gloves, your character gains 2% damage reduction for each one that is level 50. This essentially makes them take less damage. 5. What is the status phobia? If you see a status called phobia, it basically means that boss is largely weak against that element. Thus, it has a phobia of that element. 6. What to get in the slasher store? I would aim to get one of each of the slasher pieces starting with the ring. This is because new players are more likely to not have many 5-star rings, but they do have 5-star armor. therefore it makes sense to add a 5-star ring to your collection right away by getting the slasher ring first before anything else. After that, I would continue to get 9 more copies of each armor piece to transcend them for even more stats. I'd recommend getting the chest armor and helmet if you need more survivability, or the ring first if you need more damage. 7. What to get in the Abyss store. The first thing to prioritize in the Abyss store are getting the 3 affection potions. After that, I would personally save up for the gold bar. Whatever you decide to get after that is up to you depending on what you need. 8. What are affection potions? What's the maximum amount that each character can use? Affection potions provide a small permanent boost in your base stats. Each character can use a maximum of 500 potions. 9. How do I get more crit rate? Do I need more than 100% crit rate? The quickest way to get more crit rate is by equipping armor sets that give crit rate bonuses, such as the Temple Knight set or the Slasher set. As you get further into the game, your main damage dealers will need more than 100% crit rate. This is because enemies and bosses later on will begin to have crit resistance, which means having 100% crit rate is not going to work. The first number I would recommend aiming towards is 140% crit rate, and if you need more than that, then you may need to get creative and utilize support characters that give team crit rate, such as Artemis, Cain, and even Lucifer, to name a few. 10. How do I possibly get 50 to 60% cooldown reduction for stun locking? You attain cooldown reduction from refining your weapon and ring. First, you will need to get both of them to epic refinement. I would suggest you try to get at least 2 lines of CDR on your ring and 3 lines on your weapon. With a single line averaging 10% cooldown reduction, then having about 5 lines in total will give you at least 50% or more CDR. It doesn't really matter what weapon you use if you're using this CDR for stun locking. I used my other 5-star swords that my main team doesn't use for stun locking gear. 11. How many scrolls does it take to get 3 lines of attack on a weapon? Should you be aiming for that or for something else? This really just depends on your luck. Normally getting 3 lines of attack on a weapon will cost you hundreds to thousands of blue scrolls, though some people may get lucky and get 3 lines and a few scrolls. The majority of the time, you'll probably get at least 1, 2, or even all 3 of the lines to be fairly low percentages, so the chances of getting all 3 lines to be high percentages is extremely low and probably not worth your scrolls. You should instead be aiming to get 2 really good lines of attack and then have your 3rd line be something useful such as cooldown reduction. 12. How do I beat penetration resistant bosses? The best way to beat these bosses is making sure your strongest damage dealer has as much penetration as possible, as close to 100%, or if over 100%, then even better. You should equip them with an armor set that grants lots of penetration, such as the Temple Knight set, and if you need even more penetration, then I would recommend adding a support character onto the team that provides team penetration. These characters include Dark, Athena, and Aina. 13. When should you rebirth? For Cain, I would wait until he's T10, but you could start rebirthing him as early as T6. For all other characters, I would not start rebirthing them until they're at least T3 or T4. This is because most players can't afford getting that many duplicates, and T3, T4 is around the point where the cost of rebirthing begins to become much more cost efficient. I would also hold off on rebirthing until you have a large reserve of gold and red experience pots, because it will cost you a ton of both. Here's a graph depicting the rough cost of gold and experience pots needed to fully rebirth a character 300 times at different transcendence levels. Keep in mind this gold is only the gold required to do the act of rebirthing. It will cost you even more gold to then raise your reinforcement stats. 14. Can I get 5-star weapons and rings from adventure? How rare are they? All 5-star weapons can drop from adventure. However, the Efreet sword does not drop until after stage 901. As for rings, most of the 5-star rings are droppable from adventure, with the exception of the unique rings such as Demon Ring, Guardian Ring, Abyss Ring, and Slasher Ring to name a few. In terms of rarity, they are very rare, however with time, you'll eventually get all of them from simply farming. Sometimes it will take days to a few months to get one if you're unlucky. Don't get discouraged and just keep farming. 15. Where do I get this specific armor set from? Here's a quick summary of where you can obtain 5-star armor sets. Most of them can be acquired by farming adventure, However, there are various game modes with their separate stores where you need to earn their respective coins to exchange for the gear, such as Slasher and Abyss mode. 16. I lack the physical damage against a physical immune boss. What are my options? Your options are either to use a mage in order to bypass that physical immunity, or you may need to further upgrade your strongest physical damage dealer such as Cain in order to defeat the boss through brute force. This includes increasing their attack, penetration, and even crit rate. 17. What is unlocked after 1000 stages? What is the dimensional labyrinth? After clearing 1000 stages, you unlock what is known as the maze or dimensional labyrinth. Basically, this is an area where you can farm and the bosses and enemies are somewhat randomized but may have more difficult immunities such as penetration resistance. The pro is that you have a higher chance of obtaining reinforcement scrolls here, however the con is that the amount of gold you get is typically less, and because most players tend to always need gold rather than reinforcement scrolls, then this place isn't a stage that I would recommend farming long term. It is also slightly harder to farm on auto than adventure because of running into immunities such as penetration resistance. 18. Should I farm labyrinth or adventure? The majority of the time I would recommend farming adventure. Adventure tends to be easier, quicker, and rewards you with more gold. 19. What is better on your glove? Crit damage, normal monster damage, boss damage, or active skill damage? The stat I would recommend getting for your glove depends on the content you're doing. If you're doing infinite slash mode, then getting something like additional damage to normal monsters makes the most sense. However, if you're looking to refine gloves for characters with strong active skills such as Cain, Kana, and Megumin, then it makes more sense to get something like active skill damage, additional boss damage, or even crit damage. I haven't experienced much of a difference between those three. 20. Will the Konosuba characters ever come back? For now, I am assuming not. However, I have heard that the Korean server of Swordmaster Story eventually got a second release of the Konosuba characters. If that happens to us, it won't be for a while since Swordmaster Story Global is a few updates behind Korea. 21. What's the max Ideal Stone level? The max level for Ideal Stone is Phase 90. 22. What are the story milestones? Here's an illustration that depicts the story milestones. 5-star gear starts dropping after stage 280 now. After stage 451 is when the Temple Knight set starts to drop. The Witch set begins dropping after stage 701, and the Efreet sword starts to drop after stage 900. 23. What is monster penetration and what's it good for? Monster penetration is the amount of monsters you hit per basic attack. If you normally hit one monster per basic attack and equip a weapon with +3 monster penetration, then you'll attack an additional 3 enemies per basic attack. I believe this only applies to characters that are ranged. It's especially good for PvP and slasher mode. 24. What is missile penetration? When talking about missile penetration, the term is in reference to an enemy that shoots projectiles. Oftentimes projectile bosses will pierce through several members of your team with each attack. However, if you equip a character such as Vivian or Darkness who has a skill that reduces the enemy's missile penetration, then you're essentially lowering their penetration to your team by 1, so one less person on your team gets hit. This is useful if you're facing a boss that pierces 2 to 3 members of your team with each attack. By using someone like Vivian, that reduces the enemy's projectiles by 1, allowing your team to possibly survive even better with a protected backline. 25. I heard transcending unused weapons gives a passive CP boost, but I'm poor. Yes, this is true. You can transcend weapons you're not equipping and they will give you a small CP boost, however this is likely negligible. If you're a new player, I wouldn't worry about transcending all of them to T10 so soon since it does get expensive. You can always transcend them later on once you have more money. 26. Is there a stage time limit? For Adventure Mode and Dark Lord's Tower, the max time limit is 600 seconds. After 600 seconds has passed, the battle will abruptly end in a failed mission. 27. How do immunities work, such as physical and magical and elemental immunities? You should view these kinds of immunities similarly to a boss's amount of damage reduction. A physical and magical immunity equates to roughly 50 to 80% damage reduction, whereas an elemental immunity acts as an 80% reduction, so when bosses have either of these, then their damage reduction is largely increased, which is why you see yourself dealing little to no damage at all. 28. Is CP a good indicator of a player's strength? CP, or combat power, is comprised of many things but mainly derives itself from one's health and defense. So someone with a high health and defensive team will have an inflated combat power, which doesn't make them all that powerful. Because of this, CP can give you a general idea of a character's strength, but it should be taken with a huge grain of salt. 29. Does Yui and Lilith's buff to Cain require them to be in the party? Yes, in order for either Yui or Lilith's buff to Cain to be in effect, they must be in the party. 30. Does active skill damage affect haste skills? No, since haste skills don't actually do any damage but rather serve as a buff, then tackling on additional active skill damage onto a haste character will do nothing for them. 31. Is stun lock required for higher stages? The short answer is no, stun locking is not 100% required for reaching some of the higher stages. However, it will make your life a lot easier to reach the stages after stage 900 by using a stun lock team. Otherwise, you can try to make a very strong burst damage team. 32. Do I need accuracy? Accuracy is not needed until you reach the later parts of the game. This includes floors 60 and up of Dark Lord's Tower, along with the very deep floors of Abyss mode. This is because stun locking will be a common strategy for those difficult areas, and in order for stun locking to work, you cannot miss once or else that breaks the stun lock chain. 33. What accuracy is needed to stun lock the Dark Lord Tower floors? This is the rough estimate of accuracy you'll need in order to beat some of the later Dark Lord floors using stun lock. 34. Should I be leveling up my 3 and 4 star characters for Demon Tower? As long as you have decently reinforced and refined gear, then you shouldn't need to level up any of your 3 or 4 star characters at all. This will save you some experience potions down the road. 35. What amount of crit resist should I be aiming for? From stages 1 to 799 of adventure mode, I would recommend having at least 31% crit resist. For stages 900 and up, you will want to aim towards 61% crit resist or as close to that as possible. For high-end raids where you begin to deal over several billion damage, you'll want to have 51 crit resist or more. The raid boss's crit rate will slowly rise as you deal more damage, so eventually you will need more than 51% crit rate. 36. What amount of penetration should I be aiming for, and who needs it? For most characters, I would aim for over 50% penetration once you've reached the mid to late game, stages 500 and up. If a boss has penetration resistance, then you'll want to have your main DPS have as close to 100%, if not more than 100% penetration. 37. What level should my gear and weapons be around stage 700? This is pretty subjective and everyone's may be different. If you're around stage 700, I would expect all your gear to be around level 25 to level 35. 38. What should they be towards the late game? Once you're a lot further into adventure, let's say after stage 900, then I'd expect most of your gear to be level 35 to 50 depending on who we're looking at. Typically, Cain and Yui will have a slightly stronger gear since they're usually the last 2 people alive. As a result, around this time frame, Cain and Yui's weapon will likely be level 60, whereas everyone else's is level 50. 39. Why do I leave my phone on to auto farm at this stage and then when I wake up, it's on a lower stage? This happens because your team likely lost to a boss with unfavorable immunities, causing you to lose and drop down to the previous stage. To stop this from happening, simply strengthen your team or farm at a lower stage that you can reliably handle. 40. Can I link my account to a different email and login? Yes, you can link your account to a different type of login by contacting the Swordmaster Story support email below. 41. Does the difficulty suggestion on the adventure screen mean anything? The majority of the time you'll see that the game suggestion will say hard or very hard. Is that ever an accurate prediction by the game? No, I would ignore this. You can easily beat stages and farm stages that are quote unquote very hard. 42. Is the White Dragon set worth it? Personally, I have never used it. I found that it is a fairly difficult armor set to attain as a new player because of the large amount of raid symbols it costs to attain them, let alone get each armor piece 10 times for full transcendence. As a new player, you should be using your raid symbols on Cain shards, experience pots, and even stamina. Because of this, I never really had any raid symbols left over to exchange for the white dragon set. It's really only good for raids too, in addition to a few other situations. I would recommend you to use whatever 5-star armor sets you've obtained from adventure mode that are likely transcended a few times already. These will provide better stats than a T0 white dragon armor set. 43. What is evasion and do you need it? The more evasion you have, the more likely it is for an enemy to miss their attack on you. For 99% of players, this stat will be useless. Even with high evasion, monsters will still hit you the majority of the time. Evasion can only be obtained from refining and upgrading your shoes. It is a better option to use your shoes refinement for something like health, defense, or crit resist instead. 44. What stages have the best drop rate? Here is a graph made by Fur illustrating which stages you should farm. Generally, stages ending in 9 will have a higher chance of encountering a boss with immunities. Killing bosses with immunities guarantees a dropped item chest in addition to more gold. There are exceptions to this, so you should honestly test some stages for yourself to see what works best for you. The more guaranteed chests you drop, the higher likelihood and speed at which you will run into 5-star items. 45. What's the quickest way to get refinement scrolls without spending money? The best way to get refinement scrolls is through farming adventure mode. Also take advantage of the 35 blue scrolls you can buy from the demon store that resets weekly. 46. How do I find the upcoming banners? You can find out the upcoming characters summoning banners by following the Discord link below or in the video description. 47. Does crit damage and crit rate matter for healers? Crit damage and crit rate does not matter for healers, so you don't need to upgrade their rings immediately. The best stats to get for healers would be cooldown reduction on their ring and health on their gloves. 48. Where can I find active coupon codes? You can find up-to-date active coupon codes by following the Discord link below or in the video description. 49. Can I make a stunlock team with 3 and 4-star mages? Yes, as long as they have a 5-second stun, then you can use 3 and 4-star mages if you're lacking any of the 5-star stun mages. The key is making sure they have enough cooldown reduction, which is 50% or more if you're running 4 mages, or 60% if you're running 3 mages. 50. How does Belphegor's skill work? This is how I understand it. When she's not using her active skill, the buff she gets is additive, whereas the buff coming from her active skill is multiplicative. Therefore, it's better to activate her skill as often as you can. Well, there you have it. This was part 2 of my 3-part guide. In this video, I went over what I viewed as the mid-game along with some intermediate level questions you may have had. There are definitely questions I see every day on the Discord. For the final part 3, I plan on talking about my experiences and tips relating to the late to end game, so stay tuned for that. I got tons of positive feedback from my first guide, which is what encouraged me to make this part 2. Again, if you found this video informative, please give the video a like and feel free to share it to your friends if you thought it was helpful. If you haven't done so, I'd appreciate it if you'd like to subscribe if you want to stay up to date with more content like this. From the bottom of my heart, thanks for the support and thanks for watching. As always, I'll see you in the next one.